Yes. So, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, our dear participants, our experts. We are very grateful on behalf of civil diplomacy. I express my grateful to everyone who had an opportunity to attend our event today. And my name is Anastasia Chilenko. I'm a project manager of International Charitable Foundation of Civil Diplomacy Foundation. And we will start our discussion devoted to the topic in Arctic security and the changing in defense perspective in this region. I suggested this topic not by chance, because not only because I studied this region for several years, but I decided to explain on the example of those regions how rapidly the defense system, defense tendencies in our world can be changed in a few points. So we are very welcome to introduce our speakers today. This is Mr. Frederick Labbarr, adjunct professor of political science at the Royal Military College of Canada and co-chair of the Regional Stability in the South Caucasus Study Group of the Partnership for Peace Consortium of Defense Academies and Security Studies Institutes. And our next speaker is Rimgалі Абикаєв, former Kazakhstan diplomat with 17 years of experience in defense, national security, and diplomacy. So both of our speakers will be able to introduce from different point of views and different approaches how we can observe these regions and different approaches of observing the whole world system defense. So talking about the Arctic, I would like to start with the things that following for our participants, I will start. So following the collapse of the Soviet Union and the conclusion of the Cold War, the Arctic served as a region free from geopolitical challenges and military tensions. This allowed the Arctic states, that includes Canada, Denmark, Norway, United States, and Russia, of course, to focus on more diplomatic operations and non-military security challenges. Within the 80s of the previous century, however, transformative physical environmental changes across the Arctic threatened to destabilize regional relationships and heighten the possibility of a serious crisis or conflicts. These changes are altering the region's long-standing geopolitical and economic character, as new development and investment opportunities, greater access to Arctic shipping routes such as the Northern West Passage and the Northern Sea Route, open up in areas without clearly defined international rules and norms. Rapidly receding sea ice and increasingly navigable waters, combined with the promise of rich natural resources deposits, have made investment in the Arctic, particularly military and infrastructure investment, and a priority for Arctic nations and other parties that stands to benefit from the region. So we had 2022. We pointed out that this year could be positioned as an punctuated equilibrium in the story of Arctic region and relationships among Arctic countries, because those countries before 2022 tried to, as I mentioned before, focus more on the development, diplomatic relations, and eliminate the focusing on the changing in security dynamics in the Arctic, especially in Arctic Council and Arctic Euro-Barents Council. So on that point, I would like to give a floor to our first expert, Frederick Labbarr. The floor is yours. Would like to introduce his topic about the joining the new members to the NATO alliance. And yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I don't know if we can actually put in the slides into the presentation at this late moment that I sent, but if not, it's fine. I can actually give the presentation verbally.
I can switch on your presentation.
Yeah, certainly. I think it would be
yes
better than to see my face.
As you wish.
I prefer the presentation.
Presentation, okay, let it be the presentation.
Thank you very much. Well, okay, speaking about the impact on the maritime balance of power in the Arctic, about the inclusion of Finland and Sweden into NATO. The first thing we should say is, of course, Finland has been welcomed as a member of NATO last summer, and Sweden is still waiting to be accepted as a member on the basis that Turkey is opposing her membership for political reasons, for political reasons that pertain to internal aspects of Turkish policy. Now, if we switch to the next slide, I think can I do that myself, or do I have to do this? Do I have to let you do this? There we go. If we switch to the next slide, well, this is the theater of operations. Why do I give you such a wide understanding of what the Arctic means? It is because of two questions. First of all, NATO countries, there's only few NATO navies that actually, let me go back to the previous, there we go. There are only a handful of NATO countries that have actually direct access to the Arctic. Norway is one, the United States, of course, the United Kingdom, and Canada, which actually have an impact or a purported impact into the Arctic, into the European Arctic, where the current adversary is representing a threat. The other reason is that the Russian Federation perceives the Northern Fleet as its own military district. So it is very, very integrative of also land components and air components. So this is a massive, this is not only a handful of ships over there, it's also a great area of capability. So with the addition of Finland and Sweden, or the purported addition of Finland and Sweden into the mix, what can we expect in terms of the change in balance of power? Well, if we turn to the next slide, well, this is what the Swedish the previous slide actually should. There's one slide that seems to have not.
I see the map right now.
Yeah, you see the map, yes?
Yes.
And
the next
next one, and the next one after that. There seems to be one slide that is missing.
That's all what I have. I didn't delete anything.
Oh, okay. Well, then I think, all right.
You may orally just present.
Yeah. So basically, when we look at this, this is what the Swedish Navy and the Finnish Navy would actually add in terms of maritime power. Now, one cruiser, one Blue Sea cruiser for the Swedish Navy, and the rest that you can see here are basically attributed to the Baltic Sea, which is anything that happens east of Denmark, or the Denmark Strait. So necessarily, the addition of the Finnish Navy especially is its impact will be to block the Baltic fleet from the Russian Federation. That is, it will make it much more difficult for the Russian Federation to attribute more ships to the Arctic from the Baltic fleet, or to even send ships from the Baltic fleet to support the Ukrainian invasion in the Black Sea. So that is, in effect, a direct consequence of Finland joining NATO. On the other hand, the Finnish state joining NATO, that doesn't change much in terms of the balance of power. The Finnish army and land forces do not represent a threat to Russia itself. They are, until last summer, they were neutral, but they were not really neutral. If you ask anybody in the Swedish armed forces or the Finnish armed forces, are you neutral? They will say no. Since we joined the European Union, we have not been neutral at all. We have to defend the European Union because the European Union integrates a canon of international law which forces the members to defend the Union if it is attacked or if there is a significant threat to the status quo. So we're not neutral, although the constitutions of each of the two countries are very, very much were very much attentive to this purported neutrality. Is there a next slide, Anastasia? Yes, that's what I meant to show. There must have been an inversion somewhere. So the NATO navies with access to the European Arctic, that is the Arctic that matters the most to Russia, well, you have them here. These are the total numbers, by the way. These are not the partial numbers. What I mean by that is that Norway will not affect 48 of its ships to patrolling the Arctic, right? Belgium has a literal navy. It does not have a blue navy, blue sea navy. So it has limited capability, but still they are on the western side of the Danish Strait. They have access to the Atlantic themselves, and having access to the Atlantic, they can actually devote a significant part of their navies in support of NATO obligations or of reestablishing a maritime balance of power if that is needed. So these are the total numbers. If I just look at Canada, right now we're receiving new ships and new Arctic ships, but these will be to patrol the Canadian Arctic, not the European Arctic. Our frigates, which are getting older by the minute, are also divided across three fronts. Right? We have the Atlantic, we have the Arctic, and we have the Pacific fleets to also consider. So that is a very, very, very small navy for such a large country. Obviously, the United States is the most powerful navy in the world. It is also the most capable to survey Russian intentions in the Arctic. And those intentions are also geographically limited. If you look at the small map that comes from the Arctic Council here, this is a working group from the Arctic Council that gives you this map. You see the string of Arctic bases that you have in Murmansk and giving to the White Sea. And so geographically, this is very, very much constrained. This is not a very, very good position to find yourself in if you're Russia, right? Despite the fact that they have 7 ballistic missile submarines there, 12 attack submarines, 6 conventional submarines. These are diesel-electric submarines, most likely used for training of the new crews. I'm told that there's an aircraft carrier there, but I haven't seen it. The Admiral Kuznetsov has been in refit for the last 20 years. There's been a major fire last year, an accident or a sabotage. It's not tomorrow that we will see an aircraft carrier project Russian power in the Arctic and beyond. We have 1 cruiser, 2 guided missile cruisers, and 5 destroyers. However, the Russian overall fleet size is merely 186 ships. The addition of the ships of Rosatom, so the icebreaker fleet, the nuclear-powered icebreaker fleet, is significant because it enables the Northern Fleet to be a little bit more capable. If you're able to break the ice, therefore, your surface fleet can better support your submarine fleet. The submarine fleet is the most important asset of the Russian Federation in this area. Far more powerful, at least on paper, than even what the United States can actually align. Because although the United States have 484 ships, capital ships, they have some 60 nuclear submarines, fast attack submarines, and nuclear ballistic missile submarines. But only a fraction of those ships are rotated into the Arctic theater of operations. This is why the addition of Sweden and Finland would seem to bring more power to balance the maritime presence of the maritime ambitions of Russia. The maritime ambitions of Russia, which are not merely in the Arctic, they are blue sea navies now. They need to go around if they want to support their action in the Black Sea or in the Mediterranean. However, NATO or NATO countries have also their own responsibilities and obligations. For instance, you would have expected Germany to supply certain ships. I have not listed Germany here, but to supply certain ships for to cover the any effort in the Arctic, but that is not within German doctrine. Currently, Germany has actually devoted a number of ships in support of Western or European actions with regards to the support of Israel in the Hamas-Israel war. So in other words, instead of actually sailing into the Arctic, which is geographically closer and perhaps more pertinent to Germany, instead Germany's gone all the way from Baltic states into the Mediterranean to support American and European efforts in the Mediterranean, which is surprising. Only a few weeks ago, we've here at Military College, we've had a discussion from a French military expert, naval expert, and I asked precisely this question: can we expect now France to devote more of its naval capability into Arctic endeavors? And he said no. Right now, France is occupied with the emerging Algerian naval power in the Mediterranean. You can imagine our surprise when he said that, because we never think of Algeria as a maritime power. And he said something very, 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 very telling when we consider these numbers. As you see those numbers on the sheet here, we're fascinated by the actual boat itself, and we think that the boat itself is a threat. And he said, no, the Algerians have bought or buying a lot of anti-ship missiles. And this is why we're turning our attention to the south, not to the west, not to the north, and not to the Black Sea either. We're turning our attention to the south in the French Navy. So there are a number of states that actually have to contend with similar dilemmas. Spain and Portugal might be among those countries as well. They also have to contend with, I wouldn't say an Algerian threat, but they also have to contend with the fact that although they are Atlantic powers, they're also Mediterranean powers. So that limits the amount of influence that NATO countries in support of Ukraine, for instance, or in defense of the Arctic can actually align. I think we'll take questions after the two presentations, I believe. So
as you wish, I can just let our participants ask questions after your presentation or after both presentations.
Okay, let's consider also let's do this after the presentation. So let's consider also the other aspects when we consider the reassessment of the balance of power. The next slide, please.
Yes, 1 second. Yes.
So these are the factors to consider. First of all, when we consider the Arctic, we have to consider Russian behavior in the Arctic Council. That is the Russian behavior of their ambassadors. And correspondingly, our own Western behavior in the Arctic Council. The Arctic Council is vastly different as a diplomatic platform compared to the Organization of Security Cooperation in Europe. The level of dialogue, the quality of the dialogue is qualitatively different. And the behavior of the diplomats there is also very different. So much so that it is in the Arctic Council that we find more, I would say, accommodating diplomats, Western diplomats, to the Russian Federation's grievances, demands, or worries. And the way in which these worries and grievances are discussed is qualitatively different than what we see in the OSCE, which is a lot more vitriolic, a lot more confrontational, and as a result, well, we have the impasse we have in the structure of Western-Russian relations. In the Arctic Council is It is very, very much different. And perhaps it is different because of the quality of the nuke treaty. The nuke treaty of 2011, for those who do not know, regulates the areas of responsibilities mostly not for commercial exploitation, but for search and rescue and the assistance that adjacent countries or adjacent navies can render one another as the Arctic is progressively free from ice, apparently. Although the area, especially north of Canada, which we are told is going to be free of ice anytime soon, it is not consistently free of ice. It is not reliably open year-round anymore, especially not in the summer. It's not true that that you can reliably sail ships in the Northwest Passage. Nevertheless, we see an increase in tourism and a certain increase in commercial activity in the Arctic. So the nuke treaty is a very, very limited multilateral instrument to regulate behavior, state behavior in the Arctic. And because it is so precise, and also because it is very exclusive, when it says, for instance, that the areas of responsibility for search and rescue do not equate to a recognition of actual territorial waters. We still have a lot of disputes with regards to territorial waters in the Arctic. I would say that the exception to this good behavior has been manifested some years ago when the Russian Federation, with one of its research ships, which is also part of the Northern Fleet, decided to plant a Russian flag at a very, very inconvenient place at the bottom of the Arctic Sea. This has created a lot of tensions between Russia and Canada at that moment, but this is also a manifestation of that particular. This was the Harper government of 2009. The Harper government was extremely incensed by that act, saying that this was international or Canadian waters, and these were disputed waters, and that Russia was claiming on dubious grounds. And I remember that my defense minister at the time, Mr. McKay, was saying, we are not in the 17th century. We cannot just plant a flag and claim that land for our respective countries or empires or monarchies. That was a manifestation of, I would say, congenital political naivete on the part of our leaders in Canada. They fail to understand that as we I wouldn't say as we progress, but as we go along in time, more and more might makes right. The limits imposed on international law are evident for everyone to see, and sadly, this is a great tragedy of our time. We have to rely on ever increasing military capability to support our foreign policy claims. And this is something that Canada is very, very, very poor at doing. On the other hand, what Russia has done was also a manifestation of how it saw the world and how it saw power and how it saw the ways in which it could assert its foreign policy and its interests. Not very, very constructively, we would say in Canada. So that was a signal that was not integrated in Canadian policy. It was always integrated, however, in the policy of the United States, of course, and increasingly so in the policies of the United Kingdom, which were these are two countries that were the most quick to react to the Russian, I would say, renewed sense of confidence, overconfidence, I would say now. The other thing also is that although the Russian fleet in the north is rather small relative to the total, It is extremely locally powerful on paper. And I say on paper because the Russian fleet, the bulk of the Russian Navy has been integrating new ships since 2019, but only since 2019. So I would say like nearly a third of the new ships that came online in the Russian Navy have come in since 2019. So these boats are extremely new. They have not been tested in anger. That also means that the crews are new. So what is the training regimen for all those crews to be able to man those ships competently? If we look at the performance of the Russian Navy in the Black Sea relative to the nearly non-existent navy of the Ukrainian Republic, we can expect more of the same in the north as well. So although on paper the Russian Northern Fleet seems extremely formidable for a small geographic area, the capability itself, the readiness of those crews is not guaranteed yet. This is mitigated by the fact that NATO member state navies deployed their respective ships and their respective navies according to their own interests. They may be asked by the United States to support the United States in its regular patrols in the White Sea and in the Barents Sea. At the moment that we speak now, we can count on the fact that there's at least one nuclear ballistic missile submarine sailing with certainly 2 or 3 nuclear attack submarines from the US Navy just outside of Murmansk. That is a guarantee. But this is a significant effort for the US Navy these days, when it also has to put more and more attention in the Mediterranean because of the Hamas-Israel war, because also of its need to survey the Black Sea. The Black Sea is regulated by the Montreux Treaty. You cannot sail an aircraft carrier, a US aircraft carrier, into the Black Sea because of the Montreux Treaty. The Russian Federation would actually oppose its veto to that, and maybe Turkey would do that as well, right? So an awful lot of the effort of the United States is limited to the Mediterranean, while at the same time, Chinese ambitions are felt more keenly in the Far East. So that is also a place where the US Navy has to be present. So that reduces the impact of its deterrent factor in the Arctic. It needs the remaining NATO navies to supplement that deterrent capability. And NATO member states are likely to sell that support very dearly. They will say, yes, we'll send a few ships to support you, but what do we get in return? So that also is a factor of political bargaining within the alliance. And I have not touched on the existing NATO obligations in the Baltic Sea. In the case of Canada, we are very, very much present in the Baltic Sea with our squadrons. So that further limits the capability of NATO to offset the balance of power in the Arctic. The Turkish decision on Sweden is basically holding up because of Sweden's relationship with Kurdish migrants or Kurdish refugees or political refugees. As soon as Sweden changes its attitude and releases or extradites certain members of the Kurdish Workers' Party, which are considered as terrorist organizations by Turkey, maybe the Turkish veto on Swedish accession will be lifted. However, if we look at the actual quality of the ships that can be brought forward, there's only one ship that is actually capable of supporting NATO balancing in the Arctic, and that is one provided by Sweden. So that it only has one Blue Sea cruiser. The rest are dedicated to the control of the Baltic Sea and the Botnian Bay. I think I will leave it at that for now. So if we assess the balance of power, nothing much changes. That's the short answer, is that nothing much has changed for the inclusion of Finland into NATO. The only difference is that Finland will have to coordinate its defense plans with the alliance. That is the only difference. And certain aspects of procedures and interoperability will have to be meshed with the dominant powers in NATO, which are the US and the UK. But apart from that, nothing much changes in terms of the deterrent factor that Finland represents. No, Sweden is an addition to that. Yes, it's always good to have more allies, but in any case, the Swedish capabilities do not represent a significant addition to that balance of power. So I will leave it at that and wait for Ambassador Abukayev's presentation with great interest. Thank you very much for listening to me. It's been a great honor, and I wish you all the best. And I wish I were there with you, to be honest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Labbarr. I think I have to start here the presentation. Yes. So thank you for a very interesting presentation again. I have dozens of questions and comments I would like to ask you and tell also, but as you wish, I would like to give a floor for our next speaker. Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Sure. So yeah, now I will switch on your presentation.
Thank you, Professor Labbarr. That was...
So, yes, that's one. Can you see the presentation?
Yep. It
Perfect.
works.
So yeah, the floor is yours. You may start.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good time of the day, dear ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, scholars, students, everyone attending this event. My name is Rimhgali Abikayev. I'm a former Kazakhstani diplomat with 17 years of experience in defense, national security, and diplomacy. Thank you, Anastasia, for inviting me to this panel. And thank you, Professor Labbarr, for your outstanding presentation and knowledge that you are sharing with us today. I'm honored to speak today at this session as an invited guest expert, though I consider myself more of an observer or practitioner than an expert. Considering today's topic, I was wondering what I could present that you all would enjoy listening. So I decided to present my own practical views on the Great Powers competition with Central Asia in the midst of it. Everything I will be sharing is my own personal opinions, so you decide what to do with it in the future. The information might be oversimplified, but it is made for an easier conceptualization. So this is slide one, please. So Great Powers competition from a Central Asian perspective. Yeah, I understand it's a little bit off the topic of Arctics, but yeah, that's what I'm a little bit more of an expert in rather than Arctics. But yes, so let's go. Every country believes that the world goes around it. So the Central Asians also believe that everything is happening around us. That is why we put Central Asia in the middle of the competition today. In 2021, Ambassador William Burns, director of the CIA, stated, "It's one of those moments of transition for the United States that comes along 2 or 3 times a century. In my opinion, the United States still has the edge and should be considered a global superpower." When the director of the leading US intelligence agency mentions profound changes in relations between world powers, then it is something that everyone should note. Considering the lessons of the last century that was associated with the Cold War 1-0, currently we should be entering an era of new global competition. If my memory is still sharp enough, then I believe 1922 was the year of establishment of the Soviet Union. And 2022, one might consider as a flashback attempt. But is it truly that simple that every 100 years, everything just repeats itself? Yes and no. If you look at the slide, you could see that the Cold War 1-0 flags are much smaller than those on the right side. And this was made intentionally to demonstrate the globalization effect that made world more interconnected, and major powers have more strength and technological advances than in previous century. So the slide 2, please. Clash of civilizations. Yes, it is a very controversial Samuel Huntington's concept, but the world is a controversial place to live on. And there are differences in values among nations, and it is a fact. There is the Russian movie Style People, Stilyagi, that shows 1955 Moscow. Stalin has just passed away, but Khrushchev has not yet dissolved Stalin's cult of leader. An isolated group of Soviet youth starts to enjoy jazz and rock and roll. They dress up in bright clothes and dance at covered disco meetings. At the same time, they are being chased and criticized by the conservative majority of the society, the Soviet society, and Komsomol at the time. The ending scene of the movie, the most group members have already moved on with their adult lives, and some started their families. But the former leader of this group that just returned from the US reveals to his friend the reality. There is no Stilyagi in America. There is no Style People in America. This scene shows how people behind the Iron Curtain lived and how they idealized the Western world, but in the end, it was only their perceptions, and reality was much different. The Soviet youth associated the American dream as a freedom and easy life. I believe Western systems are focused on finding best talents all over the world to provide efficient work ethics and bring best results, and most importantly, the profits to do greater good. Freedom and easy life comes only after hard work. That is the rule that sustainable system has to abide by. Clash of civilizations is just a narrative. There is no good or bad nation or civilization. We're all humans who decide to believe in what we want to believe. Slide 3, please. For me, modern great power competition, it's not really a clash of civilizations. I see it as a who could calculate a better strategy to maintain a technological edge. In the end, it provides the best options for your nation to prosper for the longest years. It is also called protecting your national interests. I believe that the US maintains the global technological edge and effectively protects its center of gravity that will allow the country to prosper for at least another 50 to 100 years. George Friedman, in his The Next 50 Years lecture, describes the US as a powerful, secure nation which is able to attack others and control the oceans where trade takes place. Here are some reasons why the Chinese still haven't invaded Taiwan. First, China has an export-oriented economy, which is huge vulnerability if country loses its export. For example, the US realized it during the Great Depression in 1920s and balanced its export-import power since. Later, Japan faced the same problem because its export depended on American imports. Second, if the US imposes blockade on the Chinese ports and sea routes, the Chinese economy might collapse. Most of its export, like 60%, goes by sea. One account calculated a collapse of the Chinese economy in 90 days if the US seizes the Malacca Strait. We are talking about 60% of China's trade flows and 70% of PRC's petroleum and LNG exports. Third, World War II experience demonstrated that invading an island is a very difficult maritime operation, which might require to deploy a massive attack with fast shore landing of 1 million Chinese troops simultaneously. For this, China needs a huge fleet and great strategic planners. But we should remember the Taiwanese are long preparing for the attack, and Russia's Ukraine campaign demonstrated that invasion could fail if the opponent is expecting you, especially when the US and its allies are coordinating several lines of defense inside the South China Sea. Next slide, please. The economic competition. Yeah. No. Go back, please. Yes, it's here. Ray Dalio, next controversial figure in the world of forecasting, mentioned that while the competition between the United States and China is constant and will intensify, the risks of military war are not certain. Further, he describes a shift to a different type of war, and here are some ideas behind it. The goal of both sides is to win without getting into a bloody military war. Use deception, have the other side expend resources, weaken them, and take advantage of their weaknesses. Managing and developing own financial, economic, technological, and social strengths is more important than building up military strengths. Historically, the winner of the technology war will be the winner of the economic and geopolitical wars. This typically takes the form of developing one or more new technologies that are used to make new types of weapons. Military strengths are still important to intimidate one's enemy and possibly used to beat them militarily if the non-military strategy doesn't work. Some might think of a military term of attrition warfare, but here it is mostly focused on economic exhaustion of the opponent. To some extent, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in the 1980s eventually became an attrition warfare that devastated the Soviet military and economy, which became one of the many factors contributing in the collapse of the Union. Next slide, please. Oh, no, I think go back. Go back. Oh, I think we missed one slide here. It's okay.
I'm sorry, I don't have any slides anymore.
Oh, really? Yeah, it's fine. Just go to the economic. It's fine. So let's real quick go back to Samuel Huntington's idea of torn nations. As a Central Asian, I believe all the post-Soviet states are divided nations that live under pressure of constant competition between major economies. The Russians and Chinese, major powers in the region, adopted the communist ideologies in the 20th century and took them as the state-building models. The Russians oriented it on old-fashioned imperialism and continued the path even after the collapse of the system. The first foreign minister of Russia, Andrei Kozyrev, in his book, The Firebird, describes a conversation with a Soviet dissident who just returned from the KGB labor camp. He said, Yeltsin was good to stand against the coup, but he protected the KGB. When he gets what he wants, the real power, he won't use it for building the democratic and market institutions needed to transform the country. The Soviet dissident was right at the time. The Russians never became a free market economy, but the Chinese, with Deng Xiaoping's and current Xi Jinping's globalized strategies, developed an effective economy due to cheap labor and flexibility. For Central Asia, the global powers competition becomes the main factor of security. For this reason, we should study it and have the profits and benefits from it. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I would like to leave you with some recommendations that I address to my Central Asian brothers and sisters, but I believe they are universal and could be of benefit to many others. So first, we have to be the best businessmen and economists. A prosperous nation can calculate its costs and profits. Free market economy, I believe, is a way to go for Central Asia. Let the market define rules. This way, our companies will be agile and fight for the share on the market. When the grand logistical corridors from the west to east through Central Asia are fully operational, we have to be on top of it and profit from transit operations. The best way, I think, is to provide services at every stage. It is very important for the government to ensure transparency, and soon we will have the investments much needed for the economic breakthrough. Second, if we are the best businessmen, then we also have to be the best diplomats and negotiators. We have to learn to stand our ground at the table and to protect our interests. Do not sell the assets for almost free. Our governments have to understand that these assets are the wealth of future generations who will make our nations great again. Third, we should properly assess our center of gravity and risks. I believe we need to transfer our protocols to quantitative analysis to support the decision-making process with the best information. Take care of information that we consume and provide only proof data to the leadership and your people. Centuries ago, our ancestors were not able to follow the trends of industrialization and technological changes. Modernizing a nomadic lifestyle was crucial for our people to prosper, and inability to understand time and its requirements brought the dark ages upon us. Kazakhstani historian Jaksalik Sabitov recently mentioned that the last Kazakh Khan, Kenisari, perfectly knew that his 18th century army would be defeated against technologically superior opponent armed with the rifles. So fourth, lead by own example. I often see smart politicians telling regular people how they should live, and the very next day, they disobey own recommendations. I also often hear Kazakhstanis bring up a Singaporean example where Lee Kuan Yew successfully beat the corruption, but we do not deeply analyze how he managed to change the system. His divided nation became a holistic body that is ready to bring prosperity to their nation. Many disagreed with his authoritarian approach, but it was the only way to break a concrete hardened cultural features and widespread corruption. Recently, I was at the Kazakhstani airport and saw how people were trying to cut the line and board a plane in a rush. And then I remember airports in the US and Europe where you would not come across anything like this. I realized that in this rush and chaos, our systems, in this particular situation, it was the flight attendants, are always overloaded and cannot process the best talents. For this reason, we often see underqualified people at all levels, from labor worker to ministers, who cannot offer their best services. We need to educate our people to be more effective and have a work-personal life cycle balance. Lee Kuan Yew, for example, hired best lawyers to write best laws and made the government implement it. Otherwise, we'll be teaching our future generations to wait for help from the government and therefore lose our talents. It was the US President Kennedy in his inaugural speech with a really good motivating lesson to his nation, saying, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." And I think with such motivated ideology, the Central Asians can become prosperous in the nearest future. But building a nation is always a teamwork, so the government should do its part perfectly also. The fifth, do not consider minimum progress as a success. I think it was Sergei Guriev, former EBRD chief economist, who mentioned that sometimes flawed systems can reach a point when it is impossible to reform or restructure it. So we gotta move on. It is very important for all of us to find the competitive edge and maintain it. Progress cannot be stationary. The Central Asian countries have the capacity to make an economic breakthrough with a very progressive and education-oriented youth. I love to speak to the younger generations from my high school community or just on the street. They have ideas and we are the ones who should help them implement those ideas. Most importantly, younger generations do not have fears and limitations that often stop us from achieving success. So yeah, I'll leave it on that. Thank you very much for your time. I would be glad to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abikayev, for your informative presentation. And especially it was interesting to hear something about China in the context of the topic of our discussion, because it is not the last power and actor nowadays in the North. So I would like to suggest start the round of discussion and questions to our speakers. And you may write your question on the chat. You may raise your hand and I would like to give you a floor. If you allow me, I would like to start with my question to our first speaker, Mr. Labbarr.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. So coming back to the Arctic infrastructure in the North military, I would like to ask about the Russian tension in this case. So if we evaluate the, for instance, Russian fleet, the level of powerfulness. So how it can be correlated with the lack of the strict infrastructure, I mean, on the line, so on the coastline. So does it eliminate the risk of the powerful military development in the north? So, because if we are looking in the West Arctic of the Russian Arctic, so yeah, Novaya Zemlya, the new military station Trelysnik, and the plan of Russia to make again on this like Novaya Zemlya, the new military polygon for nuclear weapon, will it be the same successful with the other part of the this coastline, because this is 22,000 kilometers. That's enough, and the eastern part of the Arctic, this is a very strict ice, and the possibility for even icebreakers during the so the free crossing of those territory is not more than 40 days per year. This is not enough. Yes, for icebreakers this is a good possibility, but at the same time we know about the lack of good infrastructure. There is no railways and etc. How it can be insured in case of military development of Russian tanks?
That's a good question, and if the other contributors and participants to this workshop are students, I'll take this opportunity to say that we should be not worried about those capabilities, precisely because it's to access those bases from the land. It's already very, very difficult for Russia. Now that that Finland is part of NATO, now it will have a more proactive role to play if there were a confrontation. One of the roles that Finland would have would be to cut off the access of mainland Russia to the northern bases on the western side. On the eastern side, I'm less cognizant of the eastern Arctic in Russia. Probably because, as you said, it's always locked in ice, so I guess it's not a problem. But also the fact that it is a function of Chinese-Russian rapprochement, and since the Far East is not my area of specialty, I will leave it to better experts, such as Ambassador Abukhaev. But on the western side, which is the most critical part, the new bases in Novaya Zemlya, the only advantage to that is that it gives at least geographic and operational freedom of maneuver. I mean, it's less constrained for the action of the ships, but that's only a tactical operational consideration. It does not change the fact that the military capability of the United States and Great Britain, but especially the United States, in basically limiting the freedom of action of the Russian fleet in the north is very, very great. Just basically, lately the Russian Federation has tested a nuclear ballistic missile, a Bulava class missile, which has, by some accounts, misfired, which is something that I predicted in a different interview. And in retaliation, the French have actually also displayed their nuclear military might as a response. So there's a dialogue there taking place. But what do we see? We see that the level of Russian technology is not sufficient to provide an appropriate deterrent. And we are not convinced that the chain of command between the Kremlin and the red button, as we say, or the key, it's usually a key, to launch those missiles is reliable either. I mean, the Russians are not imbeciles. They understand what's going on. It's not because they cannot do anything about it that they're stupid. It is because they're limited in their choices. And it might be that somebody will be sound enough of mind to not turn that key when they get the order. But most likely, the technology that built that machine will probably not be available, will not be capable of actually effecting that launch. So I'm not worried for that part. The other thing is that Western technology has proven itself thanks to the Ukrainian war. So anti-missile technology is more than capable of defeating even a ballistic missile that's launched on short notice. And that the Russian Federation cannot have failed to notice this. If you can stop Caliber missiles in mid-flight, you can stop a Bulava for sure. I'll just leave it at that. So I'm not at all worried. I also want to stress that my remarks are also my own opinions and analysis, and not reflecting of that of the Canadian Defense Department. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Labbarr. If someone would like to add something or ask something, please, you're welcome. Or I have another question, just if it's possible. So yeah, while others are thinking about it, so nowadays, currently, looking at the international relations in this region, there is no like multilateral forums or institution dedicated to addressing hard security issues in this region. Because if we coming back to the Arctic Council or Barents Euro-Arctic Council organizations, they produce international, so they exclude military matters, while NATO primarily keeps out of Arctic matters in consideration of its Arctic member states. Therefore, efforts to strengthen NATO's roles in the Arctic must address this critical security gap among those region actors. So, and otherwise, will it can trigger a regional security dilemma? And whether there is a possibility or the necessity just to build something like the good international system that would manage this territory, manage this region.
Who are you asking the question to me, or
if someone would like to answer, you're welcome. But yeah, for you, question for you.
Well, I would like to hear from the students if the students have something to add. I mean, we're doing this for them. But if there's no intervention, is there an intervention from Ambassador Abukhaev?
Yeah, I also wanted to hear like the questions from the students. I heard that there were students, but
That's right.
I don't know. What was the like the question? Like, could you repeat, please?
Yes, I can repeat the question, because if you know the Arctic region, there is two general council that manage this territory. This is Arctic Council and Arctic Euro-Barents Council. But both of those regional agencies, like organizations, they do not include the security issues. And that is why, in this case, I say that NATO usually cooperate inside the NATO member countries. Whether there is a possibility and necessity to build something more powerful and like organization or consortium among countries to manage this region, whether there is a necessity, possibility, perspective, and etc.
I would like.
This is a question.
Oh, is this Ilya? Okay, Ilya Rashituk, I imagine, who was to know my opinion over a new role of the Arctic Council. How should its policy change, taking into account the Russia-Ukraine war? Well, as far as the Arctic Council is concerned, well, the reach and the scope of the activity of the Russian Federation through its ambassador has been limited, so they're not listening to him anymore. And I'm sure that all of them are actually quite upset at this, because they had an excellent relationship. But we need to align our policies from one end to the next, from one format to the next, and so sadly the cooperation there is limited in the Arctic Council. To answer Anastasia's question, should there be a platform to discuss hard policy issues? The Canadian policy with regards to NATO and the Arctic is that there shall be no NATO in the Arctic. If there is an attack, if there were to be an attack as we imagined during the Cold War, for example, a massive nuclear attack, a missile attack coming from the Soviet Union over the North Pole, this would be a matter. This would be a NATO matter, of course, which would be responded in kind on the territory of Europe through Article 5. But it will also be responded mostly by the United States and Canada by their own means, right? Because we have a disputed status of the Northwest Passage. There shall be, we don't want to have NATO navies start parading in Canadian waters. Just as simple as that. So we don't, we exclude NATO as an organization into the north of Canada. Of course, if we were to face an Article 5 situation, it would be a different matter, right? So should there be, so that should provide some sort of reassurance to the Russian Federation that the whole of NATO, with its 30 allies, do not have a concerted or consolidated policy with regards to occupying militarily or politically the Arctic, and therefore completely choking Russia. So that should be a factor of reassurance to Russia. If there were a need for a hard security structure in the north, most likely, I would say, if I cast my mind back before 2014, I would say, yes, this would be a great idea. Because with the existence of the Arctic Council and the way that we behave diplomatically in the Arctic Council, if we're able to replicate that sort of behavior dealing with hard security issues, that could provide the model to expand our relation, to expand our behavior and a more reasonable way to approach security dilemmas in other the theaters as well, to provide and to basically do exactly what Ambassador Abukhayev has said, basically lead by example. So if we're better able to produce more reasonable decisions and conclusions in the Arctic Circle and on an Arctic hard security platform, we could actually flag this as the way to go for our relationship in continental Europe relative to the Russian Federation. Now, we can imagine that non-Arctic countries, continental countries, such as the Baltic states and Poland, might have very, very different attitudes with regards to Russia because of their historical experiences. Mm-hmm. Still, I would agree, but then we're talking about before, in my mind, before 2013, I would agree that a platform would be needed. Is a platform possible, however, today? If I were a policy advisor to my government or to NATO, I would say, no, you don't want one. You don't want to shackle yourself with a multilateral platform that might limit your freedom of movement. If you need to sink a ship, you don't need to actually have a vote on whether you need to sink a Russian ship or any ship for that matter. So that's in this current situation, I would not agree. I would maintain pressure on the Russian Federation in any way, shape, or form, and I would not let them participate into a multilateral framework which would give them artificial power. So that's how I would say that. Let me ask you, what in case of approval, new threats for Arctic security? Ida.
Excuse me, I've got the full form of question because this is only the part. The girl, Ira, she's asking about the extension of their continental shelf. Yeah, I do understand this question because Russia applied for the prolongation of its continental shelf on the Mendeleev and Lomonosov part in the Arctic, and basically they were quite successful in this case because in 2017, if I'm not mistaken, UN, instead of Denmark, approved the preliminary examination of the right of Russia to join this part of the Arctic. But after the invasion into Ukraine, this question is out of the agenda, as I understand, and nobody, I think, will support the idea of approving the prolongation of Arctic Russian shelf. Because first, my question would be like, what the reason? So what the reason? Just to install the flag like it was in 2007 to show that this is our territory or something else? Because, for instance, if you look at the Russian science tradition, devoted to the Arctic, 2007, and the case you mentioned before with flag, is pointed out like the event, like the date from which the tension among the Arctic countries has started. But whether we have to answer why, so I think it's clear. Yes, so about the continental shelf, so this is what my short comment. Please, the floor is yours.
I think there's a question for the ambassador, and I'm glad that Ilya has asked it because I didn't dare ask it.
Ilya, thank you for your question. So the question sounds like another question of mine is addressed to Mr. Rimghali. The recent visit of European leaders to Kazakhstan may force us to think that they are trying to make bridges of understanding between President Tokayev and European capitals. May we consider it is possible to keep Kazakhstan in the pro-European coalition? They do not allow to re-export sanctioned goods. You mean Kazakhstan does not allow to re-export? Being in, it's all relative on what perspectives. We always consider ourselves in the middle of everything, as I said, in the middle of the world, in a perfect geographical place. And what we consider ourselves is to be a bridge, as Ilya said, between the East and West. And it actually takes a place, this concept takes a place from a long history when there was a Silkway, a ground transportation, a logistic route of trade between East and West. And it was called the Silkway because the silk actually was transported mainly from China to Europe. And we, in Kazakhstan, we would love to renew this, reestablish this Silkway and be a part of this transport route because it will benefit us. It always helps. There is a lot of investments that are coming our way, and both from East and West. And yes, do we want to stay in pro-European coalition? Of course, yes, definitely, because we have something that is called multi-vectoral politics. So we try to be friendly to all our neighbors and other regions, and we try to communicate with anyone who wants to invest in us and where we can work with their investments. So yes, pro-European, pro-Eastern, pro-Middle Eastern, yes, we're looking in all directions.
I think I'd like to answer Irina Profeschuk's question here. Whether I'm not exactly clear in what case, what in case of approval of what exactly?
Excuse me, Mr. Labbarr, the previous my comment was devoted to the question of Irina because I've got from her the full form of question. This is only the part she asked about the prolongation of continental shelf.
Okay. It was about the continental shelf.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert on that aspect. Canada would have its own policy, and it would say, "Screw your continental shelf. These are our territorial waters, and they are in dispute. But screw your artists or your experts or analysts. We don't buy that, and this is pure politics." Now, the issue is that the UN, this is a forum that gives legitimacy to and a form of neutrality to the decisions. After the current Russia-Ukraine war and Russia-Georgia war, as a matter of fact, and Hamas-Israel war, what will be the use of the UN? The UN's existence, I would wager, is very, very, very much under question. Very, very much under question. Especially after the COVID, the World Health Organization, COVID mismanagement, and there's another virus that comes from China all of a sudden. There will be significant pushback from all the countries and because of their populations saying enough is enough, with a non-elected body telling us how to live our lives, especially when it comes to the global climate campaign, which seems to be possessing the current Secretary General and the UN. The UN is becoming more and more a forum for developing countries, not for the general management of conflicts globally. The UN cannot actually do peacekeeping correctly. It cannot negotiate correctly. It cannot stop the rape and abuse and murder that is happening now, either at the hands of Hamas or the Russian Federation. What good is the UN for? And this is exactly what Mr. Zelensky said. What is the UN good for? And it brings into question the idea that whatever decisions that are made about the Lomonosov Ridge or Mendeleev Ridge will be completely obliterated by the fact that after the Ukraine war, there will have to be a reestablishment of the global balance of power. And maybe the multilateral world that we have been, I would say, enjoying since 1945 will not be the same. And we cannot expect Russia or China to have a significant say in the future creation of that multilateral world. Because we've seen China and Russia abuse the Security Council. Have we done the same thing in the West? Yes. But I would wager that our way of life is more respectful of individual liberties. Not perfect, but more respectful. That explains why people are migrating to the US or to Canada or to Europe, and not migrating to Jordan or Russia, for that matter. Well, they're migrating to Russia for operational reasons, but you're talking about a clash. Ambassador Abikayev was talking about a clash of civilizations. Yeah, yes. The Russian foreign policy is talking about a civilizationist foreign policy, saying in our neck of the woods, in our area, we do things this way because this is our civilization. Well, as much as I'm admirative of some aspects of Russian culture, this is not a civilization that I think is worthy of existing. I'm sorry. And that's also my point of view, not that of my government, of course.
Professor Labbarr,
yeah,
I agree to some extent. Yes, but like on that note, how the Russians, I think it's the instrument that they are using of this making Russian world idea. It's it's also like a clash of civilization. It's just a narrative that they're trying to control, and it's like it's information warfare against your own people. And when you zombie them and just make them believe that, yes, I disagree what it stands for, and it's just not right, because it's discriminative, and we've seen it in the previous century, what it led to, and it's not a right way to prosper your country.
Yeah, I have to agree. Until the war in Georgia and Ukraine, it's striking, because Russia was actually trying to leverage soft power and cultural power to a very, very, very effective extent, and it made itself all of a sudden so attractive and so charming, even in certain cases. And it looks like Mr. Putin and his gang lost patience. To him, soft power was not giving them the leverage that they needed, and they just gave up, and they reverted back to hard power, which is a real shame, really a real shame, to not have had confidence in themselves. When we talk about propaganda, we have this dilemma here as well. Politics is about speaking. Like we're speaking right now. We may have more or less agreement on certain aspects and disagreement on the other aspects. But we have to talk about that. And as long as we talk, it's fine. Politics is about trying to change each other's minds. Okay? Well, what is the problem now that we face nowadays is that any attempt at changing another person's mind means that I'm using propaganda, I'm using manipulation to change that other person's mind. And reciprocally, that person who's trying to change my mind is being dishonest by using or misusing the facts. That is very, 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 I would say, perverted. Because then there cannot be any politics. I must, to show resilience to propaganda, I have to close my mind. I have to be conservative by default, saying, well, my way is the best way, and whatever you think is completely wrong. I could agree with you, but then we would be both wrong. That's not the way it is. Where does propaganda start and end? That's the real question. If we cannot define that, then we cannot have any more politics. And we can only just shoot at each other until somebody says, I agree with your point of view because I cannot fight anymore. And that is not the preferred way to go, to be honest. So we still have these dilemmas as we engage with one another in dialogue, over dialogue, and behind the scenes dialogue, because you can imagine that also, the United States, the UK, and Canada are speaking to Russia, and Ukraine is speaking to Russia behind closed doors to negotiate. Right? There needs to be dialogue like that. To answer the question of Mr. Shetyuk, do we foresee a permanent military presence in the Arctic? What possible implications of this movement might I caution? I don't think that anybody wants to fight in the Arctic. Nobody really likes the place. In Canada, we have trouble keeping the northern populations in place there. They want to move south. It is at great cost that we deploy a national presence in the Arctic. As you probably know, we have our alert base at the far north on Ellesmere. I think it's on Ellesmere Island, and this is the northernmost place that we have the exercise of our sovereignty in Canada for the Arctic. Apart from patrolling and submarine sailing and ensuring and finding out where other people's submarines are sailing, I don't think that there will be a greater military presence in the Arctic. There's no military resources there. There's no reliable operational terrain that can be had there. I mean, if you install a base on an ice shelf, what good does that do you if if the ice melts, right? So it's I don't foresee anything like that. At least I don't see it in any policy in the United States or Canada on my end. We may see certain developments on the Russian side, probably to break out of that bottleneck that they've put themselves in Murmansk and Polyarny area. But I don't see them breaking out of that bottleneck anytime soon. And the more movement that they have, the more movement that we see. Because make no mistake, and I'm saying this to the attention of any Russian who might be listening right now, our satellites are looking at you 24/7. All eyes are focused on Russia and whatever coercive means that it has at our disposal. And the targets are already been selected and the ships have already sailed. So bear that in mind. And if there's any Russian soldier listening, or families of Russian soldiers listening, if you're in Ukraine, I would say surrender. Call the phone number that you tell them that you want to live and surrender. That's the best outcome for you and your family right now. That's all I can say. No problem, Ilya. My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Labbarr. And I've got one more question about the article. I just had it in another chat. I will write it in the chat for you to say that.
Yeah. That's yeah, I have to agree with that. That's the question. Do you think the distinctiveness of the Arctic is kind of fading away insofar as the Arctic's involvement into the clash of countries, like clash between USA and Russia, China, is concerned? Is its distinctiveness fading? What does this portend for the Arctic? Well, I think I wrote a paper on this in 2011. At the moment when my government, Mr. Harper's government, was developing a lot of policy effort into developing the Arctic, probably on the strength of the lobby of powerful mining companies in Canada. And so he developed the idea that security in the Arctic should be basically more presence of, like, the Canadian Rangers, more naval presence and more police presence in the Arctic. Whereas the people who live in the Arctic, when they talk about security, they mean more search and rescue capabilities, more hospitals, better infrastructure for schools and healthcare. That's what they mean by security, and better roads as well. So the policy attention in the early 2010s was extreme, and I thought that for this time is for real. Like, this time the Canadian government and maybe the American government are going to put a lot more resources into developing the Arctic, perhaps a road, perhaps bridges. That's what I would do. What if I were in charge of Canadian policy, I would install bridges over every other island to control the flow of ships that can use the waterways, and to tell the world this is not a strait. These are not international waters. These are Canadian straits. These are Canadian waters, because we can actually bridge them very, very easily. But in typical Canadian fashion, what I add, we quickly forgot about this. We had our front page in the Globe and Mail, which is the national newspaper here. And as soon as we got the first page, we said, mission accomplished. We don't need to talk about the Arctic ever again. Let's forget about this issue and put it under the carpet and never bring it up again. So that is sadly, it is not a function of the current clash between the West and Russia, or the disquiet that we may find with China. It's simply that this issue comes and goes. That's all. That's really all. It'll come back. It'll come back. I don't know who asked the question. The Arctic will come back eventually, to be forgotten again. So.
Yeah, brilliant point of view. Yeah, yes, please, Mr.
Professor
Abikaiv.
Labbarr, I totally agree with you, because I made a little research 5 years ago about Arctics. It just came out in front of me, and so I started researching. But after that, I never heard about Arctic anymore, and it just really it goes away, and nobody pays attention, especially for the probably the next 10 to 15 years, when the US-China clash, economic warfare will go. I believe the Arctic will not be the main focus.
That's right.
Yeah, especially if it melts, then it's the other question. But for now, yeah, and maybe the Northern Sea route will have much more attention if it starts melting by 2035. I believe there was a speculation that it might melt, and it might be a possibility for China to cut the logistic costs and the time for shipping its goods to Europe. But for now, yes, it's still frozen.
In that respect, the icebreaker fleet of Russia is dedicated to actually opening up its own northern passages for China to access. So, in a certain perverted way, we have to applaud the Russian farsightedness in that respect. Sadly, you break the ice. You break the ice for commercial shipping, yes, but you also break the ice for surface fleets to go to and fro. Yeah. So far, if you just look at the size of the Northern Fleet, I mean, it's the naval assets that are there. This is significant, but it cannot be replenished very, very easily, because this is not where the shipyards are. The shipyards are in the Black Sea, and right now, Russia's economy is going tits up, as we say, because of the war, because of the war effort that is being deployed. And we also have to wonder the quality of the workmanship of the average Russian worker. What kind of ship is going to be sailing at all? And how are they going to be manned? If we look at what happened to the Moskva,
or Admiral Kuznetsov.
Admiral Kuznetsov, or what is not happening to Admiral Kuznetsov. 20 years in dry docks, that's great for the shipyard. It's not so great for Russia.
That's true.
So, yeah, I have to agree with that, unfortunately. If the ice melts, they were promising us by 2014 that the Canadian Arctic would be ice-free during the summer. It's not happening. It's not happening.
It doesn't eliminate the risks, because if you are looking on the picture of the temperature in the Arctic during several periods and seasons, the temperature is much higher than it was before. And for instance, if we observe the behavior of polar bear that are to be on the higher north than they are in the specific period of the year, like time of the seasons and etc. But they are going on the more and more to the continental part. So they are leaving the high north, because this is not normal for them. So yes, the ice is melting. It's not so quickly as many propaganda and populistic point of view is shouting, but it's melting. And as many ships will be crossing the northern Silk routes as China announced it in their white book. So basically, maybe for our listeners will be interesting, the first icebreaker that China had been built in Ukraine, and they called it Hulong. Now they have two icebreakers, Hulong 1 and 2, but they rebuilt the first icebreakers, and that is crossing right now, not right now, but periodically, the northern passage that Russia consider as its sovereign passage, not allowing other countries to follow in, like, it is not free.
And in that respect, I'm sure that Canada would completely be on the side of Russia, because Canada has the same problem. Yes, the ice may melt one day. Is it man-made? Is it our fault? Can it be reversed? Do you want to reverse it? I don't know. I mean, I'm Canadian. I can be resilient to the cold. Do I like it? No, I don't. I don't like the cold any more than any of you like the cold. Does it? And climate change may be a thing, but climate change is not always a bad thing. If it starts raining in the desert, I fail to see how bad this is a bad thing. If the ice melts in the Arctic, well, that piece of territory underneath the ice, or that piece of water underneath the ice, will remain Canadian. As far as we're concerned, as far as Canadian policy is concerned, that will not change our policy. It may affect the means that we deploy to protect or to execute that policy when we see that more ships can actually traverse the Northwest Passage. And the same will be happening in Russia, I'm certain. They will be very, very exacting with their sovereignty, as they should be, But whether it melts or not, it will not affect Canadian policy in that respect. Right?
But it should influence indigenous people in the north, because the melting ice, the changing of the temperature, completely changing their traditional ways of life and the migration routes of the reindeers, and because of the open possibilities for different companies to invest into the oil extraction and gas. What is going on, for instance, in the Yamal Peninsula, or that where China Petroleum Companies has more than 30% of the investment in LNG projects. Before that, before the war in Ukraine, also French Total, Netherlands companies, Spain companies also had an investment, but China remains the key actors in this region, and it's completely influenced on the people who lives in this territory. Because if we take the Russian part of the Arctic, among all Arctic, 4 million people lives. Canadian, American. If the Russia side is 2.5 million, among them 26 representatives of different indigenous groups with their traditional ways of lives that are to leave this territory because they cannot prolong, like they cannot implement and develop their traditional ways they had before. The same can be on the other parties, like on the north of Norway and Sweden. But I would like to appreciate the approach of Scandinavian countries, because I consider them as the best in their policy toward the indigenous people, in their policy toward their chairmanship in the Arctic Council, and how do they care about the climate change and sustainable development in these territories. Perfectly comparing it with their defense policy. So it seems like they have found balance.
Yeah, I will not comment on Canadian policy relative to the First Nations or natives in the north. That's because that's an internal matter, and I don't. That's not my expertise. Will it change their ways of life? Perhaps it will. Yeah, but I'm sure they will adapt.
Yes, true. Because of course, every person can adapt, and this is a long process, but adaptation. So maybe someone can or want to add something, ask a question. I don't see.
I hope it was fruitful for everyone. I hope everybody enjoyed it.
Thank you very much, our dear experts, our participants who ask questions, but I would like to ask you maybe next time, just participate more actively, switch on your cameras, and you're welcome to participate in our open discussion. Don't shy. So yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Labbarr, Mr. Abikayev, for our interesting discussion. I will be very glad to see you again in our meeting. And if you are in Ukraine, you are mostly welcome to attend our office and our fund. So yes, thank you very much.
Next summer.
Thank you.
Next summer I'll be there. I promise.
Thank you, Professor Labbarr.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Abikayev. It was a pleasure. And
was a pleasure
Mitro,
to meet you.
Ilya, Vladimir, Angelina, and Veronica, and Irina,